So I would now like to invite Roshan to present. So Roshan, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Just checking everyone can see that.
We can, Roshan.
Awesome. I assume from that you can hear me too, which is good. Awesome. So thanks, Nick. Really appreciate being invited here today to talk about the research that we did. As Nick mentioned, we were commissioned by WasteMINZ to develop a bit of a baseline of the economic value of the waste management sectors, including contaminated waste resource recovery and contaminated land management sectors. So the key question is, so what is our research about? And why are we doing this research? So the issue at hand is that the key challenge that the sectors, as identified to us by WasteMINZ, is that they're finding it difficult to influence policy because of limited economic information. There's a lot of kind of information floating around, data information floating around that talks about the kind of volume or the quantity of information or data in the sectors, but less so around the economics of it, the value of it. And that's what this research set out to do. Our objectives were clear, that we were to assess the economic values of the sectors to Aotearoa, New Zealand, and provide a baseline of the economic information of the sectors. Our scope is, again, compiling the existing economic data on the sectors and their economic and social contributions. It wasn't about kind of creating something new. It's about grabbing everything that's out there and putting it in one place. We were to then estimate the economic contribution of the sectors by analyzing the inter-industry flows, and also on top of that, investigate broader concepts of economic value related to the sector's activities. Outer scope was really clear in terms of, and this is what kind of helped a lot with the research, is really clear things that are out of scope as well. So anything that was non-quantifiable cost benefits that lack strong evidence, any commentary on the waste disposal levy settings, or any wastewater infrastructure. So the key thing for any economic contribution assessment or any industry analysis, being really clear on what we mean by the sectors. And so for this piece of research, we had a few criteria. So that was waste collection, waste treatment disposal, recycling services, environmental protection, and also waste and scraps products. So that is what we mean by the sectors. And when we look at the economic data, it's quite definitive in terms of what's in and what's out. So when we look at, we have to focus down on the core industries and the products that are generated or produced by the core industries and other industries. One of the key things, and why this slide itself is quite key, is that the core industry, which is one of the NZIER industries, which is the waste collection, treatment, disposal services industry, produces a series of goods that relates to the core services or the core products. So things like waste disposal, recycling, environmental protection services, but it also produces other goods and services. That being said, our core products, waste and scraps and waste disposal services, are also somewhat produced and provided by other industries as well. So that's one of the key things that we did within this research, is to unpick that relationship and use that to inform our analysis. Key data sets that we used. Really focused high level, kind of mostly on the Stats New Zealand data sets, so the tier 1 data sets as much as we could. So that's your business demography, the national accounts, the input-output tables. There's also really interesting information from the local authority, income and expenditure estimates. Ministry for the Environment, we looked at the waste statistics that they've been collating. Treasury CBACs, so the social cost benefit analysis model that they have around impact values and certain metrics. We also coupled that with a whole bunch of other information sources like academic literature, public reports, and also informed heavily by a bunch of stakeholder interviews. Those stakeholder interviews are really, really key for us to be able to understand really deep down the key challenges and the intricacies of the sectors and how it worked. Key findings. What we found was that the core waste collection, treatment, disposal services industry produces about $2.4 billion in direct output. And when we say direct output, it's an economics term to talk about the value of production. It's not quite sales or revenue, but it's kind of what it's a bit of economist speak for the value of production. And this helps to support almost $1 billion in gross value added and around about 7,200 jobs. So gross value added is also synonymous with GDP. It's the contribution to GDP, if you want to think about it like that. And the other thing to say as well is that these are based on the 2019-20 input-output tables. So these are to the year March 2020 prices. When we expand the sectors to include sector-related products supplied by other industries other than our core industry, it expands the sector contribution to about $3.3 billion in direct output, which supports almost $1.4 billion in gross value added and 10,400 jobs. So that's in total, not additional to those numbers above. But really one of the key things as well is that what we found in our broader research is that one of the key challenges for New Zealand's industries across the board is that New Zealand produces less with the same or more resources than other OECD countries. We get about $1,400–1,500 of economic output per ton of material consumed in New Zealand versus the OECD average, which is closer to 2,500. Then looking at the broader economic considerations, an estimated 40% of waste sent to Class 1 landfills is divertible. That's avoidable to private disposal costs of over $220 million in 2022. Waste emissions in general account for 4.5% of New Zealand's total greenhouse gas emissions. And the cost to abate these emissions for 2022 was estimated $481 million. And the costs associated with waste have been growing. Local councils have increased their spending on solid waste management, reaching almost $630 million in 2023. Illegal dumping costs councils millions of dollars each year. And wasted food costs households on average $1,300 to $1,500 per household every single year as well. So that kind of gives you a bit of a background around kind of what we found and also some of the key insights and the key opportunities and drivers for this research. The rest of the presentation, so we'll take you a bit through kind of how we got to these numbers and kind of a little bit of a deeper dive into what they mean. So we'll start off with the industry snapshot, then look at the industry linkages, go to the broader economic considerations, what we found there, and also a bit of a discussion or a comment around where to from here. So looking at the business demography data sets, what we found is that the industry itself has been growing in both size and scale. We see on the left-hand side the number of employees over time from 2015 to 2024, and on the right-hand side we have a number of kind of businesses, geographic units. Geographic units kind of like business locations, things like warehouses, depots, head offices, those kind of things. So not only has the number of kind of geographic units or business locations increased over time, employment itself has also increased. So more businesses, more business units, more employment overall. When we look at how in the most recent year to 2023 or 2024, how the industry, the core industry itself is made up of a subset of industry classes in the data set. So what that means is individual businesses that provide specific activities. So around about 45%, almost half of the business or geographic units of the industry is made up of solid waste collection services. But interestingly, it accounts for less, like almost just over 1/3 of the total employment across the industry. Whereas waste treatment disposal services, waste remediation services make up a larger share of the employment, but a smaller share of total number of businesses. When we looked at the distribution of the industry employment and businesses across the country, what this really shows is that it really just follows population, which makes sense. Where people are, they create waste. you need the employment of businesses in those areas to help deal with that waste. One of the key things that we also found is that the cost of managing waste has increased over the years. So in 2019, in the time frame between 2019 and 2023, it's grown about 45 to 47% nominally across that time period. And councils in 2023 received $691 million and spent almost $630 related to their solid waste and refuse activities. That being said, expenditure has remained in similar proportion to the overall operating expenditure. So it's not that the cost of waste has kind of overshot the cost of everything else. It's just in general, the cost to councils have increased. And one of those items is the cost of dealing with waste. Then moving on to the inter-industry linkages. So this is a lot of information, so we'll just kind of talk through a little bit. What these show is that looking at the input-output tables, what we can see is a whole bunch of products that are used by the core industry and also what it supplies or produces. So on the left-hand side, we have a whole bunch of products. So by and large, the core industry uses waste disposal, recycling, environmental protection services, but also uses a bunch of other things to help support its production. So things like maintenance of its machinery, equipment, road transport, freight services, management consultancy, so technical services, including and also architectural and engineering services, employment, compensation of employees, a whole bunch spent on capital, other products as well. Then on the right-hand side, what we have is the list of products that the core industry produces. So by and large, the core industry produces waste disposal, recycling, environmental protection services. I think kind of around about 90% of its total supply across the economy. So it really says, okay, well, this product is supplied by this industry specifically, or by and large. But it also provides a few different products into the economy for other industries to also use. So things like cleaning services, electricity production, kind of chemical products, man-made fibers, chemical fertilizers, salts, those kind of things. So taking all of that, what the real kind of headline takeaway, I think, from especially about some of the feedback from that poll is the total economic contribution of the core industry. So what we did here was look at the economic multipliers, so the direct, indirect, and induced. So direct is the direct production of the industry, the core industry. The indirect is the kind of upstream services. Output is what we kind of tend to use. So that's to say, okay, well, to support its own production, it needs to purchase inputs from other industries. So that goes into the indirect. And the induce is really what that covers is if you think about it in the way of, every dollar of production from an industry is also then used to pay employees. Employees then go home, take their paycheck, and they then spend that in other parts of the economy, things like supermarkets, entertainment, movies, cafes, those kind of things. So that's what the induced covers. So when we look at that across everything, it's about $2.4 billion of direct, an additional $2.4 billion of indirect economic production, and about $1.2 billion worth of induced economic output. And overall, that's contributes to gross value added of about $2.7 billion. So that's contribution to New Zealand's GDP. Then expanding our scope of research further, what we found was really interesting, and this is something that quite a few people have grappled on and kind of talked about, after releasing the report and having discussions, is that one of the key findings that we found was around New Zealand's material productivity. And so that's what is the value of our production relative to our materials consumed. And what we can see here is that New Zealand produces about 1,500 US dollars per ton of material consumed, compared to the OECD average, which is about 2,500. So it really shows that in New Zealand, we're consuming a lot more for every dollar of output, or getting less. Now, looking beyond the economic data, one of the things that we want to look at was how the relative impact of the waste produced and the trends over time. There's really starting to get really good information around how much waste is produced, what that looks like across the different classes. Some of the stuff around the kind of other classes have started to come in, but wasn't enough information out there, or kind of number of years information for us to really do a lot with. But class 1 landfill, that's been going for a while now. So we can see that in 2024, class 1 landfills facilities kind of handled 3.35 million tons of material, and they diverted 0.35 million tons as well. But the amount of waste going to class 1 landfills in 2024 is back down to 2014 levels. So it's increased over the last decade, but it's trending back down again. Only time will tell how consistent that trend will be. And across all classes, class 1 landfills made up about 47% of total material sent to landfills. Class 2 is about 9%, and classes 3 and 4, the remaining 44%. And 24% of all material sent to class 1 to 4 landfills, so all landfill classes, was diverted in 2024. This is just a high-level summary of some of the other indicators that we found as well. So again, that material productivity statement, that's only about 59% of the OECD average. We also found this is the high cost of wasted food. So that was it's been a long-running study that's been done on the cost of food waste. So it's about $1,300 to $1,500 per household each year. And there are also quite a few opportunities for us to reduce waste. When we started to look at some of the waste audits, we found that 40%, around about on average, 40% of waste sent to class 1 landfills is divertible. Applying a private landfill cost onto that from the Treasury CBACs, we get about $220 million. That's the economic cost of the private cost of that. Waste sector emissions. So again, the cost to abate waste sector emissions is about $480 million, and that's the future cost to government to offset or kind of reduce emissions in other sectors. Illegal dumping, again, costs local councils and ratepayers millions of dollars each year to clean up. And what's really, really interesting as well, and what I think was a really key insight, is that the amount of community involvement in waste issues, and there was a significant amount of community volunteer time that was being spent and kind of being offered up through a whole bunch of community organizations, which shows that this is an issue that New Zealanders really, really do care about. And they're willing to spend their time and their effort and their resources on helping to deal with it. So where to from here? Now that we've established the baseline of economic data on the sectors and their activities, we discussed a little bit about the shifts in how New Zealand deals with sector-related issues and obscures the sector's values in the future. So one of the key things as well in this research is that because we looked at it from a lens of the core industry and the core waste industry, any additional effort in the future to reduce the amount of waste that we produce, that reduces the demand for services for waste management, if that makes sense. So what that means is that if construction companies reduce the amount of waste going to landfills, that reduces their demand on, say, rubbish trucks coming in to pick up their services. So that kind of obscures the goals and the value of reducing waste in general, being better with our waste and with our materials in general, which means that doing this study and looking at that over time makes it kind of tricky or challenging, but also really interesting, is that you then have to start looking into the sectors that produce the waste and the value that waste minimization or resource recovery that's being done in those sectors, and what that looks like, rather than focusing only on the one individual industry. And how we can start to do that is looking at future research when we start to drill down into these key segments. So things like satellite accounts and satellite accounts. The most prominent one in New Zealand is a tourism one. We think about waste management as an activity, well, so is tourism. It's a collection of industries that all work together within these core issues. And that's where things like satellite accounts come into play. And they're really useful when you're looking at the economic value or contribution that's associated with certain market activities. You can also start digging down deeper now that we have that baseline, things that jump out to people. We can say, oh, that's a really interesting thing. I wonder if we can find out more about that. So looking at individual segments of the different parts of this report and doing market studies and really digging down deep into the core issues that the industry is seeing and the sectors are seeing. That's pretty much it.
Thanks so much, Roshan. That was really good. So for those of you who attended the conference, a fair amount of that you will have heard already, but always worth hearing again for us that did attend the conference, but also there would have been a number of you that didn't attend the conference. So great presentation, really interesting. Please put your questions in the chat. I don't see any of them here, but I know, Katie, you did ask if anyone had any questions. Where do you put them? Put them in the chat. I'm going to start because there's none in there anyway. Roshan, has NZIER done this type of work for any other sector? Sorry, this question is probably a bit out of left field. For any other sector, and how have they used that report in a way that benefited their sectors?
Yeah, absolutely. So this type of report is part of our bread and butter at NZIER. We do a lot of kind of industry assessments, market assessments, those kind of things. I think one of the real key things, our strengths, is that we understand the data, we understand what it can show us. Our clients tend to come to us with these questions when similar to yourself and to WasteMINZ, is that there's a lack of real understanding of the economics of industries or certain industries, and just having that baseline information just provides that evidence base for a lot of their, even if it's kind of industry analysis or identification. Some of it's used for potential advocacy research, but at the same time, we make sure that we keep our stuff independent. But it's also really useful when looking at any policy, whether it's government or industry bodies or private sector businesses, really understanding, well, what does the industry look like? Where is the industry going? What are the key challenges? What are the key issues? And just having that evidence base just provides so much to help drive any strategy, any goals and plan setting, but also any policy development going in the future.
Great, thank you. Now there is a question. Thank you, Sue. Appreciate that. So, who does the tourism satellite accounts, and is there a rough guess on the cost of that? I can probably answer part of this, but do you want me to give it a go? And hopefully, I'm right with this. Chris Purchase and I actually met with Stats New Zealand to talk to them about creating a satellite account for our sectors. They're not looking at that at the moment. They said it is quite a resource heavy thing to do, and it would take a couple of people a whole year to actually do that. They didn't give us an estimate of how much it would cost, but yeah, my understanding is it's Stats New Zealand that would do that work. Roshan, have I got that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so Stats New Zealand produces the tourism satellite accounts. It's a annualized thing, or every couple of years that they do it. I don't know exactly off the top of my head. So Australia have recently done a waste satellite count. However, it's still early days a little bit in terms of what they've done. They've done quite similar to what we've done in this report here, is that just to set out the industries and the baselines. But what we really want to highlight there is that this is it's a cross-sectoral cutting issue at hand, and just looking at one industry or a couple industries itself, potentially, especially in the future, if we're successful as a country with our goals around waste and resource recovery and resource management, then we'll be missing the whole picture, and that looking at it across industries and across sectors is really what we want to point out with something like that?
Great, thanks, Roshan. There's a really good question in here. How is a 40% divertible materials in landfill percentage calculated? Was it based on just the material type from swap audits, i.e. 20% of waste is timber, timber is recyclable, and therefore 20% is divertible? Or was the material type plus viability to recover it looked at? Do you remember, Roshan? It'll be a while since I did this. Yeah.
Try to think. I believe it was mostly just taking stuff from the swap audits and taking stuff. It was really clear, and credit to WasteMINZ that they were really clear that we weren't to do any primary research on our own. So we didn't look at kind of any individual, make any value judgments of what was divertible, not divertible. So we just took the research as it was. But a lot of it from those from the council documents themselves and from the swap audits and those kind of things, where if they said that it was around about that much, then that's kind of what we've taken the kind of average across a few of them.
Wonderful. And probably one last question from me. There's no more in the chat at the moment, but was there anything that really surprised you, Roshan, when you were pulling this research together?
Yeah, for me, it was around the amount that there was. So I think that was really, really key to the success of this, is that actually this is one of the industries where there is a lot of information, there's a lot out there. And what we tried to do with this piece of research is try to just bring it all into one place to show, okay, well, if you want to look at these sectors, you want to look at these issues, here's actually quite a lot of information, and here's one place where we've tried to bring it all together. It can be a lot of the time when you embark on projects like this, you sometimes can run into issue where there's just not that much information. And we were really pleasantly surprised at how much that was, and how much the industry itself, not necessarily just government, is pushing on, putting information out there so that people can do research and look into these estimates.
Wonderful, thank you.